especially those of us who are DEI thought leaders as well, our vocation to be the interrupter, but also the builder. And how do we do those together? I think it really deserves time for reflection and conversation. So I'm glad to be with you all today to engage in that question around doing both of those. So I want to start off because as I was listening to some music, I heard this song by this woman, Rochelle Farrell. If you don't know who she is, she's a phenomenal jazz singer, but just phenomenal. And she has one of her songs, and these are some of the words. How can we have peace in the Middle East when there's none at home? How can we have understanding in the land when there's none in the woman and there's none in the man? How can we heal the wounds of the world if we cannot heal our own? Where does this peace on earth begin if not in the home? And what I love about this is that it's all personal. It all brings it all back to ourselves as individuals, as individual leaders, as academics, as the DEI people. It puts the focus back on us. So how are we engaging in this work to heal other places, to heal other people, organizations and whatnot, if we can't heal our own? And so I'm talking about this really in the space of what I do, but I invite you to think about as well, how do you do this work in the spaces where you live and you work? I also want to give a couple of disclaimers here. In my time with you all today, as we're talking about this work, I am talking about Moses. I'm talking about me, myself. I am not making any assumptions that this is how you need to act or what you need to do. This is all about me individually. So I may say some things that you might think, ooh, I don't agree with that. That's totally fine, because this is about me. This is how I see this and how I see myself showing up in this work. And if at the end we can, you can ask more questions about that, but I want to make sure that I keep you in that frame of this is how I show up. And what's important for me as I move through space and do my own work to create this more just, caring, and thriving world that I choose to live in. So let me start with a little bit of my background. And I this is important to share with you because it really kind of influences kind of where I am now and how I got to the place where I sit now. So I grew up in Holland, Michigan. I was born in Detroit. And I think when I was 2 years old, we moved to Holland, Michigan. So those of you, if you know Detroit is a predominantly Black city. All my father's parents, family is mostly in Detroit. We moved to Holland as kids, and moving to Holland was, again, I was 2 years old, so I don't remember the moving there, but I do remember loving it. And in Holland is a predominantly white town. I assume it still is, but it's a predominantly white town. And but there are a few spots, groups of color. And so we had a nice little amount of Chicano or Mexican citizens who lived there, in Holland, as well as a small little group of Black folks who lived there. And because those two groups were so small, we got along very well. And why that's important, because my parents growing up there, so I was able to see difference as a kid. There are people around me who were speaking different languages who didn't look like me. And I really had a strong benefit of being a child in a family that encouraged that curiosity about other people. Both my parents were people who were very open, about others around the world, and encouraged the exploration about other people and other places. And so I grew up knowing that the world was bigger than myself. It was, and that there are other people whose experiences also mattered. And so I'm really thankful for being, the son of two parents who made it their part of their mission, for me, was to teach me about inclusion. Even before we knew what the words were, for DEI, but I grew up in a space where they really allowed me to grow and see difference. The other part about my life that I realized growing up is, so as I was growing up, I often found myself being that vulnerable male friend for my other male friends. So, and even still now as an adult, I still feel that role. And I didn't know for a while what was happening there. So I always knew that as a kid, in high school, college as well, and in my adult life, that, with my male friends, and let's talk about, the stereotype of, maleness is, that vibrato and, we gotta be hard, man, especially Black men of color, we gotta be hard, you can't, be soft, or you can't show fear or weakness or whatnot. I found there was something unique about me, and that my male friends who were all those, trying to be hard and all those kind of, individuals, I was the one growing up that they could come to and talk to. There's something about me that made them feel safe and being vulnerable with me. Oftentimes, I'm the one, if they're in a relationship that's going array and they want to cry about something, I was often the one who they would come to and they could cry without fear of judgment. I found I was the one that they could come to if they're angry about something to just vent, about how they're feeling about something without judgment, and I knew something was different in that I could hold a space for them and they knew it as well. But I didn't know, kind of the why, but I said, I'll lean into that. I create a space for my male friends to be vulnerable. And then as I grew up, I realized kind of more the why about that, which we'll go into as I share my talk today. But I knew I had the ability to be that one, to be able to provide vulnerability, to provide safety, to be someone who could support, who could challenge and love. So that's a big part of my background as well. I do come from a faith tradition. I'm a Christian. I was brought up, Black Baptist Christian, and my faith for me still is to this day probably, I would say, my most salient identity. However, I will also tell you that when I talk about faith and my faith, it is not in the same realm as I think about how Christians show up in this world. And so I spend a lot of time arguing with Christians. I think the way Christians have kind of behaved, themselves, ourselves, for all Christians, I think it's been quite triggering for me. It's been quite, again, my words, y'all. This is my story, not yours. So I don't want to say anything that I'm not trying to offend you. This is how I show up. I think when I see Christians in the world and how they've shown up through all the hatred, all the bigotry, and all that, I'm like, yeah, that's not the Christianity that I support. That's not the faith tradition that I know. That's not the God that I serve. So I spent a lot of time in this work talking about how faith is so important to me, but it ain't that. It's not what you're seeing out there, on the news. I don't do that. That piece of faith that's making you less than or making someone feel that they don't matter or whatnot. So that's important to me for you to understand about my background and how it's kind of led my life in this work. I grew up loving Stephen Covey. I shouldn't say grew up loving him, but in college, I was able to go to one of his sessions around the 7 habits of highly effective people and loved it. And one that truly stuck out with me was seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I realized in my own viewpoint about engaging in this work, especially the work of DEI, and wanting to be more intentional about learning from people and being with people, it truly has helped me figure out how to understand you first, then before I be understood, okay? And I realized sometimes people just want to be heard. Sometimes people just want you to listen to them. They want to feel they matter. So that's been a very, very important part of my journey to Moses. My work that I've done, so I've worked predominantly in higher education and student affairs. My current role, I'm the director of DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the Jackson Laboratory. And so it's my first position that's really sort of I don't say it's outside higher ed, but it is outside a little bit. But I say we have a toe still in higher ed. The Jackson Lab, it's a biomedical research institution. So we work a lot with faculty. We have a lot of faculty who work with us studying disease and doing a lot of biomedical research. So I still have a little bit of that education slant to my work, but a lot of it now is kind of that nonprofit corporate arena, which has been very different. And actually, it's been a very welcomed place for me in my life. But in my higher ed background, I started in student affairs, did res life. From there, moved into DEI positions. And as Tanya said as well, joined LeaderShape, which has been a huge part of my professional career now as well. So I say this because all of my background leads me into who I am today and why I show up the way I do in this work around DEI and this whole notion of how I think about the importance of being the builder and the interrupter. Because in my whole life, I think I've been that person to be the builder and the interrupter. So those of you who are in higher ed, or those of you who are leadershipers on the call, you all know of our wonderful good brother, well, my good brother, alpha brother, Dr. Jamie Washington. And I did SKTI years ago, back in 2008. If you haven't done SKTI, they are still accepting applications, I believe, and so you should apply to that. Small little plug for SKTI. But in this session, this is 2008, I was it was a very emotional session, and I was talking to the group about something, and at the end, Jenny Washington pulled me aside and says, "Moses, you know what? You show up in love." And I never forgot that. And when he said it to me, I paused for a second and thought, I show up in love. I show up in love. And the more I kind of meditated on that piece, I'm like, ooh, the more I fell in love with the thought that I show up in a space in love, you know? And I'm like, I do show up in love. Love is that's how I enter the world. That's how I enter spaces. That's how I enter relationships, from this foundation of love. And when I show up in love, that also, for me, helps me to understand how I respond to you, how I respond to situations and to other people. If I show up as that foundation of I'm showing up in love. So for me, it's very, very important. And I never forgot that when Brother Dr. Jamie told me that. And it's stuck with me since then. So since 2008, I've claimed this now. So this truly is how I enter this work around DEI, leadership, all of that, is I show up in love. And I can tell you as I go through how it's helped me be involved and be intentional about this work, showing up in love. All right. So I am one, again, who works in DEI and knows that there's a lot happening in our world. There's a lot happening around us with people and ignorance and all of that. And it is so important for me to be successful in this work that, again, I have to be the builder and the interrupter. And I think of this image here, about this little kid, and if you can see the hand there are all these words, that people are saying to this kid. And I remember being growing up, my parents said, sticks and stones could break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Yeah, that's a lie. Okay, that's not true. I think we tell our kids that to kind of to build strength, but folks, that is not true. Words matter. Words hurt. Words can choke out. And so I see myself as being one to be able to step in like this when I see this happening, to make sure that I don't create a space where people around me can be hurt by the words of others. The people around me can know that they're seeing that they matter, and that the words matter. And so I've learned how I show up in spaces to interrupt this pattern of saying, they're just speaking words, just let it go. So in my experience, there are three examples here that I think are really important to share around how words and actions and how they matter. When I was working on my PhD, I was working in a class on HR leadership, the class I was taking. And in this class, there were about 9 students in this class. And of that 9, 2 of color. So me, and there's a woman, an Asian woman. And one day there's a woman who's speaking, a white woman is talking, and she starts talking about Black women's hair. And she mentioned, oh, I love, these colored women in their hair. It's just so cool, because they can do all these different things with their hair. And it's so awesome. And so I heard that and said, okay, well, that's not okay statement. So here I am figuring out, okay, well, how do I be the interrupter and the builder? And so I said, oh, Amy, I'm sure people will appreciate, you liking the hair of Black women. I said, however, can you not use the word colored? It's a word that's pretty antiquated now, and there's a lot of negative connotations to it, so it's not a word that we use anymore. All right. So that's me being the kind of the builder and the interrupter. Amy's response was, oh, well, I don't think it's a bad word. Whatever. I think it's fine to say. So I'm like, okay. Well, Amy, it's not a good thing to say. So I'm asking you, to please not use that word when referring to me and people who look like me, because again, it's very negative. 2 weeks go by, and we're in class again, and I'm talking about white privilege in the class, and we're going through a conversation. So Amy then says, I don't believe in this white privilege. Again, Amy's a white woman. She says, I don't believe in this white privilege because, that's, I wasn't born wealthy, and colored folks now have all these rights. There are rich colored people and everything. And I said, Amy, so I'm sorry, I got to stop you. Okay. I need you to not call me colored again. Okay. You cannot call me colored again. All right. So again, being the interrupter. Now, what was powerful about this piece here is when the second time I said that to her, she goes, well, Moses, I don't see that as a bad word. I don't see that as a bad thing. It's colored. The professor then, who's also a white woman, said, well, Amy, and there's your white privilege. So again, I can be the interrupter, but here's why I needed some help with someone who was white to also say, and that's your privilege to say that you don't see it as a bad thing, but he does as the Black man. So as I go, I'm going to talk a little bit later on about your village and getting your advocates as well. But that's how you become the interrupter and the builder. Because what I didn't want to do is say, oh, you stupid, racist person, you. Like that wouldn't have been very helpful, even though I may have been feeling that at the time in the space. But I knew me saying that to her would not have been beneficial. So it's important to figure out, again, how do you be the interrupter and the builder? As you all know, 2016 happened in our country. And I also want to acknowledge as well that as we talk about DEI, what I've realized in my work as well is that oftentimes we talk about DEI and identities, that we oftentimes leave out political affiliation. And that's a huge part of our identity and how we see the world. And so in my work now, I enter that back in there. I talk about our political affiliation, identities as being part of who we are. But I would say for me, 2016 was especially different because I don't think that I didn't expect kind of what happened after the Trump Clinton election there. And so where I was working at the time, I would say, a big miss for us is that we did no preparations on campus for a Trump presidency. We all left work on the day before. We all knew that coming back the next day that there was going to be our first female president, of the U.S., and everything was kind of geared towards that. And so, as we know, that didn't happen. But what was interesting for me is that morning of, I got to work, about 8:30 in the morning, and at the time I was working with some multicultural counseling area. And when I got there in the morning, all the doors were closed for my staff, and we had a line of folks waiting to see our counselors. So I couldn't even check in with my staff just to kind of see how they were doing in this space. So between 8:30 a.m. that morning and noon, of course, there were a lot of emotions happening around, but 4 things happened on this campus in that between that pattern, that time, 8:30 a.m. to noon. We had a Muslim student was chased across campus and had ran into our college education building, and a faculty member saw her and ran in the bathroom to help her. We had 2 Black students on campus who were on our campus bus, and some white students yelled nigger at them and told them to go back where they came from. We had a Muslim student, female student, walking across campus, and some white men ran behind her and snatched her hijab off of her head. And we had some other students on another bus just chanting Trump, Trump, Trump. So I, at the time, I was in a leadership position, and I was seeing this happen. And also at the time as well, my office oversaw all the bias reporting that went out for that happened at the university. So I sent out a message to the student body. I had access to send out a message, and it was more about hey, I know this is a challenging time for many of us. A lot of us are sad, are scared. We're having this, these events happening on campus, and also these 4 things that happened just on my campus. If you're watching the news, they happen all around the country. But on my campus, these 4 things happened, and I responded. Now, I received hundreds of emails back from students saying, oh my gosh, thank you, Dr. Davis. I really appreciated that. And the message was, here's where you can go for counseling and whatnot. But there were a few respondents who were like, how dare you send this message to me? Take me off this listserv. You're the reason why this country is going to hell in a handbasket. How dare you send this, your liberal agenda to me? And so these pieces here. And I didn't want to, go back and forth through an email with this. But one student in particular wrote back and said, Dr. Davis, I'm so offended and insulted that you did this, as you're just assuming something's wrong. Like, we are a great country, and we are a country of laws, and we voted the right person to the end, and you're stoking a fire. So I told the student, I said, you know what, can you come see me? I said, I'd rather not talk to you back and forth via email. Let's chat. And he did come back to see me later on that afternoon. He came and saw me in person, because I didn't want to be able to be in a space where I'm having this conversation via internet, and there's that internet courage, or that virtual courage that we talk about. And as he's sharing his concern with me about my email that's being sent out to him, I share with him, and here in this little span of time, 4 hours, we have these 4 major events that happen on campus. And so that there was a reason why we had to send that message out. There was a reason why that people are now frightened what's happening in this space, because there were literal events that were happening just on our campus and within the world. So again, for me, it's figuring out, again, how do I be that builder? Because I want to be able to call him in. I want to be able to talk to him without, being upset or whatnot. But I want to make sure that I can interrupt that pattern that he was going to of, everything's gonna be all right. We're all fine. Where he just got to discount the pain, literally, of at least 4 people, but definitely the pain of folks all around him who did not even share their stories of negativity. And then, of course, as well, we all know the murder of Black Floyd, oh my gosh, of George Floyd, and the Black Lives Matter movement really kind of taking off, a few summers ago. And we saw, for me, I would say I saw a lot of hatred, kind of swelling up, in our country. And I thought, again, like, this is interesting how we are engaging in this work. And I found for a lot of folks, when I talk about Black Lives Matter, after the murder of George Floyd, my white folks and colleagues, and other white folks in general who I was working with, were able to say, oh, now I get it. Oh, Black Lives Matter. Okay, I see what you're saying now. Black Lives Matter, because yeah, if you have your hands in your pocket while you have your knee on the neck of somebody, yeah, I can see how lives don't matter. Okay, I got it. So there was this piece of figuring out how to help folks understand why we use Black Lives Matter, why, folks would say, oh, well, all lives matter. Well, right. And that's why Black Lives Matter. It's because all lives matter. So I found myself being engaged in conversations around this, and using, the murder of George Floyd as really a stepping point for folks to really start to engage and understand more and more deeply about, I get it now. Okay. And again, for me, it's figuring out, how do I help folks start to interrupt this negativity in the space of ignorance, and othering, and be mindful of myself as well. To, again, I want to build and interrupt. When I think of building and interrupting, I think about holding space, and I talk about holding space for ignorance. Because it's so often that we have folks around us who are ignorant, and it is what it is. And for me, again, I'm clear on, as I said, I want to show up in love. I'm clear on that my role as a human being, as a leader, as someone who does this work about DEI, is that I want to be able to build. I want to be able to interrupt and educate and move things forward. And so I know, for me, I have to be able to hold space for ignorance, because someone's going to say the ignorant remark, someone's going to say the homophobic remark, or the whatever, is remark. My thing is, okay, well, how do I respond in that to be able to interrupt that, but also, where appropriate, say, okay, well, I think I know what you mean, but maybe this is another way to say this, or how might we, change that to be more effective later on. And I thought of this slide here. This was sent to me years ago, and I was a kid who grew up in the era of Charlie Brown. As a kid growing up, we always watched, every Charlie Brown episode that came out during the holidays in the country. And someone sent me this slide, and I love this. This is from the Great Thanksgiving, Charlie Brown. And And I've seen this, this episode 50 million times as a kid. And someone made a comment to me, it's about 10 years ago now, and they sent this to me, and I'm like, there's no way that this is real. This is, this is the fake news slide, right? There's no way that they would have had this scene be in this iconic cartoon where they would show this. And folks, can I tell you the shock that I had when I went back to watch the episode, and this is the exact scene that is in that clip. I think it has changed now, but literally, you think about the pervasiveness of ignorance and racism, and I'm like, I had seen this again 50 million times, but I'd never seen this. I'd never noticed that the Black kid was on the side by himself for years, all my life of watching this. Even the dog, I know people love Snoopy, whatever, but even the dog is sitting with other people. And this kid is also, he's in a long chair. So not even a sturdy chair to be at the table. And I thought, wow, if I can miss this for, nearly 20 years, think of how subtle racism is, sexism is, and how overt it could be as well. But I bought into the idea that, oh, this is just what it is, and that's how subtle some of the stuff can be, is that we just don't see it. But it doesn't mean that it's not impacting our lives. And so what I want to figure out as well is, again, holding space for ignorance. All right. Perhaps to have folks see this and say, you know what, this is a problem. Let's talk about this. Let's figure out, well, why is it that we have a space where the one kid can be by himself? And be able to have a space where I can talk to you about that without getting upset about it. In one of my positions that I work in, I brought a speaker to who spoke around transgender identity and trans health to come talk to some folks in my current where I work with the Jackson Lab. And so there were a lot of folks who were on the call and the training. And again, it was all about really about the health of trans women, to be specific. After it was over with, I received an email from a colleague who I work with, and they said, Moses, you're new, and I know you're new here, but just so you know, we don't do that here. That trans stuff, no, we are a place of morals, and that's not something that we support. So again, I know you're new, but we can't do that here. So, and this did not come from leadership, so this wasn't from someone who even had a leadership position there. But it shocked the crap out of me, I'm not gonna lie. It shocked me dramatically. And then I said, whoa, okay, wait a minute, Moses, now. Okay, remember, you said you show up in love, all right? You say you want to be the builder and the interrupter, interrupt this. How do you do it? So I ended up reaching back out to the individual and invited them to lunch. And we had lunch 3 times. We got together 3 times for me to be able to talk to them about, okay, let me understand more about why you say we don't do this. What is this about, this that's affecting you, because you also don't speak for the entire organization. And for him, it got down to, oh, well, I believe that, I'm Christian, and, and I believe that, we shouldn't be promoting lives that are, immoral. It's okay. You know what? I also hear you say that you're Christian, and that's how you see it, but that's not the way the rest of the world sees it, and that's okay. You can have your own views, but you saying something like that, to make someone else feel they're less than, not going to fly here. Okay. I want to make sure, again, as the interrupter and as a builder, that I can stop that mess, of them saying, well, I believe my beliefs as Christian are more important than someone else's life here, being immoral, without saying, how dare you racist, sexist, whatever, all the things you want to come to, to say to charge somebody when you're angry at them for saying something. I want to figure out, again, for me as Moses, how do I, again, interrupt this pattern, but also build, because I want to make sure I keep the door open with him as well, so I can constantly challenge him if I need to. I didn't want him to see me as, oh, here's the Black DEI person, the DEI police. So again, the whole notion of going back to being the builder and the interrupter. Okay, those of you who know much about what's going on with CRT, critical race theory, in the media, it's quite jarring. It has been over the past year as folks talk about CRT, and you realize so much ignorance around CRT and what it is, what critical race theory is, and what people think it is, because they've heard from certain people. I have a PhD, and I actually use CRT as my theoretical framework for my work. And so it's been very interesting to sit back and kind of hear people talk about it. And what I've done, instead of being angry about it, is I love to invite folks into a conversation about it. And so if I'm in the right space, I'll say, oh, so you mentioned CRT, you think it's ridiculous. Tell me more about that. What is it about CRT that you think is ridiculous? And I do it in a way that doesn't sound condescending, but I'm able to engage someone and say, okay, well, that's not really what it was about. I said, but is your concern that we're teaching young folks about our history? And if we're talking about history, is it bad to talk about the history of Black folks? Is it bad that you don't want to have your child be in a space where they're hearing negative stories about that they may have done in history? And I said, okay, well, what about the folks who were on the receiving end of that negative story or experience? How about their experience? And why can't they be heard, and learn? So I'm able to sit back with folks and challenge with this. Again, being the builder and the interrupter. What I'm very clear on is I'm not going to be the debater. Okay, I'm not going to debate you on some of this stuff. And so when I enter into a conversation, I'm truly entering it into a conversation. A debate is something totally different. I'm not doing that unless I'm planning to be in a debate. Otherwise, I'm just going to be able to have a conversation with you, and vice versa. If you enter that whole debate space, we can agree to disagree and move off. But again, I go back to how do I interrupt and build in the space. So how we do this, so I'm very clear that we got to do our own work. Okay, we as individuals have to take responsibility to do our own work, to be engaging in this work. We got to be able to keep learning and growing. Okay, Stephen Covey says you got to keep sharpening your saw. So we have to do that. All right. I truly do believe that we have the capacity to be the change that we want to see in the world. So again, when I tell people all the time, I want to live in a world where people are more loving. Okay, then guess what? I'm more loving. I want to be in a space where people have a wonderful, curiosity about other people and want to learn from other people. So guess what? I live my life in a way that, I want to be able to learn from people, and I figure out how to model that, in my life, in my work, as well. There's a lot of work going out right now, and this whole idea of calling out versus calling in. I truly have shifted from a calling out paradigm to a calling in paradigm. And how that shifts for me is, in the past, if you see sexism, if you see racism, if you see homophobia, you call the mess out, call it out. Again, that's interrupting. But what we do when we call out is that oftentimes we make the other person wrong, we make them small, we make them, we make them defensive. And I thought, if I shift from a calling out to a calling in, how might the conversation change for us? And for me, calling in allows me to still interrupt what's happening, but also challenge you or challenge an individual to say, here's my challenge with that. Here's my problem with what you're saying. Do you mean X when you say this? It's a way to keep them engaged, and keep them thinking about it. And folks, it just works. For me, it works very well. I also know my triggers. Okay, so as we're doing this work, know your triggers and know when you need to disengage. So again, for me, I know that I cannot enter into when it goes into debate. I can't do that because I know that's where my blood starts to boil more, and I lose sight of my goal of showing up in love and wanting to when I'm in debate mode. And it's just not healthy for myself to be constantly in debate and debating people who really don't want to engage in a conversation with me about difference. They just want to be able to say their side. And with that knowing triggers and knowing when you need to disengage, there's why I talked about earlier about building your army. All right. I am very clear as Moses in this work. How I show up in this work is how I show up, and it works for me. However, I need sometimes somebody else who can go in and say, you know what, this is a bunch of mess. I need somebody who can go in and be able to challenge in a way that I can't. So I know who my army is, and I'm still trying to build more of them, okay? But it truly does take a village when it comes to doing this work, because I know there are people, when I get choked out of something, There are people who I know who can come in behind me and say, let me help you out, Moses. Okay. This also speaks to the whole notion of allyship and why it's so, so important to have allies in the work that we do in this world, because again, there's access that people will have that I don't have. And I need them to go in as my ally to continue this work and help me move things forward. And also for me, I'm very clear about my why. So again, my foundation is this whole idea of showing up in love. I'm clear that I want to create a world that's more just, caring, and thriving. I want to live in a world, again, where people can feel that they're seen, that they're heard, that they matter. I want to live in a world where the image I showed you earlier of the little boy who's being choked out, that I don't do anything to allow another child or human to feel that they're choked out like that. Okay. And I'm oftentimes very, very aware, very clear on my intent and my impact. My goal is to always make sure that my intent matches my impact. Okay. So these are all ways for me to kind of stay in this and do my work, to be clear about the world that I want to live in, so that I'm also being very true to myself as we're engaging in this. All right. So I see we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that I give time for questions. But I want to close out again with this quote from Michelle Farrell, not quote, but part of her song. And again, if you love jazz, please listen to her. She's phenomenal. But again, how can we heal the wounds of the world if we cannot heal our own? And where does peace on this earth begin if not in the home? And so it's important for me to keep thinking about that as I engage in this work, as I continue to find ways to be the builder in this work, and as I continue to interrupt the mess that goes on in this work. So thank you all for taking time to listen to me. Here's my email there if you have questions, or LinkedIn. But if you have questions here in the chat, please list them here. But thank you for being present with me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Moses. This has been absolutely wonderful. And I want to join folks who have appreciated you in the chat for just sharing so much of yourself with us, and telling some stories that really ground us in the work. I have a question as people maybe think of their own questions. You mentioned, if I think it's 2 slides back, maybe, yeah, 2 slides back. One, I've never seen Rochelle Farrell quoted in a workshop, so bonus points there, like one of my favorite singers. But you listed all of these really great, I think of them as steps, and ways and things to remember. And you talked about knowing your own triggers. Obviously, we need to do a whole workshop on just triggers, and there are tons out there. How do you stay it's sort of like, how do you stay current to your triggers? Because sometimes our triggers live deep. And how do you allow them to surface so that you can do the work on them?
Yeah, so triggers are very, very deep. There's some great research out there about triggers as well. And Kathy O'Bear also, if you know Kathy O'Bear, she's a DEI expert as well, and she writes on that. So for me, triggers show up in several ways. One, the ones that I know about, I'm able to foresee. But there are ones that show up that I don't realize, as you mentioned, that I can tell when my heart starts beating really fast, and I can start to feel my blood start to boil, and I feel my lips wanting to purse, or I realize, ooh, Moses, okay, you're at a trigger point, and so let me take a deep breath. All right, let me deep breath. Let me think about what's happening here. And so I'm able to kind of just to interrupt my own pattern of saying, of just responding. I also can say where triggers get me the most, it's probably gonna be really interesting for some people, where I get tripped up the most is with my loved ones, okay, and my family, where the triggers come in. People I care about, who care about me, and they say some of this stuff, and I'm like, what? And again, they're still people. I'm still doing the work at home with my loved ones, with family. But there's where I know I really got to be able to say, "Ooh, all right," And sometimes in that thing, I got to walk away.
Yep.
and say, you know what, or I'll name it. One of my favorite cousins, he and I mean, I love him, to death. Uh, we are polar opposites when it comes to politics, and we had some very loving moments, I will say, over the last several years with politics. And I got to a point where I would say, you know what, I can't talk to you right now about this, but can we come back to it? And that was our thing. We were able to do that, to come back to it. And what I appreciate about him as well is that as he saw me respond to him, and some of the ways that I saw, politics, he also then started to shift how he would come to me in some of his political ways. He would then start thinking more about, how do I say this in a way that Moses could hear it? So here, the whole idea of being an interrupter, now I'm modeling with him, okay, I want to just say this out there, just get a reaction. I want to say this in a way that Moses can hear this, so he doesn't get to a point where he needs to walk away. And me in the same way, I want to be able to say it to him where he can hear me, but also know when he's gone too far. So I think that's, for me, that's kind of a way that I've done it. And I'm still doing it. But again, I say for me is being able to stop and take that quick breath where you feel your blood starting to rise in the trigger space.
Absolutely. And I love that you all are staying in it with each other to do this work together. It's not okay, well, I can't talk to you anymore, I'm just going to go my separate way. It's the staying in together, that builder part while you interrupt. So we have a couple of questions that have come in. Laura asks a really great question and talks about being on teams where folks insist that we need to push students to grow in their understanding, but then the staff involved resist doing that same level of work. How do you think that we can push ourselves as professionals, as folks who are leading the work, to do better?
Yeah, I would say exactly as I just mentioned, we're talking to Dexter, my cousin. And oftentimes, I mean, who's Laura said this, you're exactly right. And I've been in that space a lot. And again, in that space as well, I'm very, very clear of how I build and interrupt. And I'll ask a question. I'll say, name it, hey, y'all, I see we want to engage our students, in conversations around X, Y, Z. I see we want to move that way. But my question is, how are we moving in that way? And typically, there are enough folks in the room who can say, oh, it's enough of a pause in there. And why that's important is that I didn't say y'all all racist, y'all all sexist, y'all all messing this up. I've also seen people do that too. And when they go there to try to shut it down, they get shut down and it becomes ineffective. And so again, I've done, Laura, to your question, I just said, okay, well, you know what, how can we get our students here if we can't do it ourselves? What do we need as staff to be able to do this? And what I found in my work is that most times folks will be like, oh, ooh, you're right. Or, ooh, okay. Well, it creates a thought, it creates a conversation for employees to get this work before we tell our students to do it. Now, in my current role, so I don't work with students as much. Probably like 1% of my job is with students. So I'm working now with professional staff and leadership. And I think even as being the first DEI director for the laboratory, and I have phenomenal leadership. I know I'm in a space of privilege when I think about our senior leaders, and I do that even with them to say about this work we're doing around DEI. How is it that we show up as leadership to make sure that people can do this work in DEI? How do we show up if you want people to come to trainings and being engaged and whatnot? How are we modeling that? And so again, I can ask questions in a way that help to release judgment or dismiss judgment where people feel like they're going to be in trouble or that I'm a diversity police. So that's how I model it.
So speaking of being a diversity police, I want to bring Kristen's question in as our last one before we close. Kristen says, thank you for sharing today. Question, how do you balance calling folks in versus calling out with the fatigue of educating everyone?
Yes. That is real. And I'm trying to think of a real situation where I've done that that's appropriate to share for now. So the fatigue is real. And again, I go back to getting your village, okay? Because you can't do it all by yourself. It's exhausting to do it all by yourself. And having your village is when you know what, this was said. And I can't be the one to tackle that right now because I'm impacted by it. That's where someone can tag team on your behalf and say, you know what, let me come in and say that, because again, if you're going to be effective in this work, you can't be the only one who sees the ism, who sees the challenge or whatever it is. That's not sustainable, So the example I used about the professor in class, and the girl calling black folks colored. I needed her, as a professor, say, you know what, Amy, that's your white privilege. Because I couldn't say that at the time, and again, be true to yourself as well. If you know you can't be in that space to be the one to call in, that's okay. Maybe then in that space, you say, okay, either I remain silent in this, but also if something happens where it's so egregious, you're like, I can't remain silent. It's so intense that I gotta be able to call it out and say it. Okay, maybe you do. It's also okay for you then to say, you know what, let me say this, and we can come back to it. But at least I acknowledge that here's where I am right now. I'm gonna acknowledge that this is what just happened in the space. And I can't talk about it, but at least I'm gonna call it out per se. And maybe you come back later on to call it in. But again, you got to figure out kind of what works for you. You want to be, true to yourself. But again, I think that's when you have your village around you, because they can help you tag team some of this stuff, because it gets hard and you can't do it all by yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As there's a quote out there, I think it's from Angela Davis, that says, liberation only happens in community. And
Yeah.
that's what I hear you saying. And this is going to sound totally corny, and I'm going to say it anyway. Thank you, Moses, for being part of LeaderShape's Village. I'm so grateful to have you as part of this work that we do together.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm honored to be there as well.
Thank you for today. And I want to share for folks who haven't heard about LeaderShape's programs, just a little bit more about our work. We have 4 programs, and Vernon, who is actually on here, is one of the great people that you will get a chance to talk to as you reach out to LeaderShape about Catalyst, Resilience, the Institute, which is thriving and back in person as we we didn't really, I guess, take a break, but the pandemic put the Institute on pause. But we are welcoming partners back, and of course, courageous dialogue. And we have a new one coming in the new year called Living in Possibility. And so reach out to us if you are interested in hearing about any of those programs. Go on the website, learn a little bit more. Again, just want to invite folks to know that we also are a nonprofit. And so if you are interested in forwarding the mission, feel free to come on over and donate. And we have some days that we also accept donations, but we're a nonprofit and we love doing this work and we want to do more of it. Thank you again, Moses. Thank you to everyone who has come today, and we will have another session tomorrow at the same time and for the rest of the week. And so we invite you back to those. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, folks.